Thank you so much for being here, and we'll start with Kevin.
Yeah, my name is Kevin Weiss, and thank you for that introduction. We'll start with a few slides on the work that I was doing during my PhD at Rice University. I was really fortunate to work with Professor James Tour, who was really one of the forefathers of graphene, a real early adopter in his research, and just some of the cool work we've been doing. But over the past few days, when I ask people why they're here, and then they ask me why I'm here, I say graphene, and people say, oh, what is that? So of course, that's where we'll start. Graphene is a 2D supermaterial, is really what it's known as. And so back in 2004, it was discovered that you can get this single atom thick sheet of carbon atoms. And so they're bonded together, these carbon atoms, in a honeycomb type lattice, and this gives it really incredible strength. It is the strongest material known to man. And it is also just incredibly conductive, thermally stable, chemically stable, and has all these incredible applications, such as strengthening composites, kind of to reinforce cement, plastics, things like that, all the way up to making flexible electronics and touchscreens, making miniature transistors, right? If we have this material that's one atom thick, then we can stack these layers on top of each other, make these incredibly tiny transistors. And so most people have usually heard of graphite, which is actually just layers of graphene. And so if we think of sheets of paper stacked in a book that's on our table, that's what graphite is. But when you start layering these sheets of graphene, one on top of each other, it loses its magical or really incredible properties. You lose some of the really interesting conductivity, physical properties. The material properties are replaced by brittleness, of course, like in graphite. But if we exfoliate that graphite, removing a layer at a time, then we get graphene. And so Novoselov and Geim discovered this in 2004, and they were awarded the Nobel Prize because it was just such an incredible innovation. And so they actually were making graphene by using Scotch tape on pencil lead graphite and using that Scotch tape to pull one layer off at a time. And so of course that's not very scalable, but they were able to isolate enough to study and say, this is an incredible material. And so since then, in the past almost 20 years, we've had this material boom on graphene, but it's really been constrained to an academic and lab scale innovation. And so that's because making graphene is pretty difficult. So we can either go what's known as the top-down method, and that's what Novoselov and Geim did to earn their Nobel Prize, going from graphite, which we can mine out of the ground, and exfoliating it. And so instead of using Scotch tape, now we have much better methods of exfoliating. It's probably the more scalable method traditionally, but traditionally it results in sheets that might be damaged, or you might have multiple layers of thickness, and so then that hurts the properties that make graphene so amazing. We really want a pristine, defect-free, large, single sheet of graphene. And so when we're trying to rip it off of graphite, we can run into issues with that. The other common method to make graphene is known as the bottom-up method. And so we're basically taking a mess of carbon atoms, shown on the top left, and building our graphene sheet atom by atom or bond by bond. And that sounds like a pretty hard process, because it is. It's really high quality graphene because we can control how we make it, make just one sheet that has no defects, but this is not easy to scale, right? So both of the common traditional methods of making graphene have these shortcomings. And this has really hampered industrial implementation of graphene because it's hard to scale and it's also really expensive. So it's about $60 to $200 per kilogram. For reference, rubber is about $3 per kilogram. So if you want to use this amazing material in any of these applications, whether it's electronics, transistors, reinforcing composites, then you really have to pay a lot. And so Ford Motor Company, just 15 years after graphene was discovered, started putting it in their cars. So graphene could be in your driveway right now. But because of the high price, they only put it in certain components, really under hood plastics, actually. They found that it increased the strength, the heat dissipation, the noise canceling, things like that. So they're willing to pay that premium to put a little bit of graphene in your car. And yeah, just as Louisa talked about, we didn't plan this, but I followed George's pretty closely, and he talks a lot about graphene's aluminum moment. And so yeah, here's an image of them putting that block of aluminum on top of the Washington Monument. And so before we realized how to make aluminum metal easily, it cost more than silver. But once we realized that a process called electrolysis can make aluminum very easily. The price dropped 96% over just more than a decade. And once the price dropped, we could start using it in applications. Like the Wright brothers motor was made of aluminum. If it was made of traditional alloys, it probably wouldn't have gotten off the ground for its first flight. So aluminum, all through the 1900s, became this symbol of modernity, and we use it for all things, whether it's making Christmas trees in the 1970s or using it in cars. The applications are endless. And so the takeaway from the aluminum moment is that we need new methods to make materials to be able to unlock the global market opportunity and the applications that follow from these wonderful materials like aluminum. So I'll talk a little bit about the work I did in grad school, getting my PhD that we've published, and a startup has blossomed from, where we can make graphene from that bottom up, so starting with a mess of carbon atoms and rearranging them into really high quality graphene sheets. We use a process known as flash joule heating, and it's pretty scalable, unlike most bottom up graphene methods. And so here on the right, there's a little video. Where we are converting grams of trash, actually plastic waste, into graphene, really high quality graphene. And so you can see this is a real-time video. We call it flash joule heating because we see a flash of light when we are making the graphene. And so we can even convert waste materials, any carbon source, into our high value, high quality graphene. We don't have to depend on graphite. We don't use any solvents or catalysts. We just get graphene in a flash. And so the way our flash joule heating process works is basically the same way that a toaster works. So joule heating is when we pass current through a resistor, we get heat, just like a toaster. You see those coils start glowing red hot within a few seconds once you plug it into the outlet. But instead of waiting for that slow heat transfer to toast our bread, it's like we're plugging our carbon feedstock directly into the outlet. So we're discharging current through it. We get extremely high temperatures reached, which break the bonds in, say, our plastic waste, and they reorganize to make our graphene material. And so one of the really cool things is that the graphene we get is known as turbostratic, where those layers of graphene are rotationally disordered, as you can see in the top right. And like the Lego analogy below them, they're really easy to separate and use in applications. And so this is a graph showing that if we add less than 0.1% or 1 gram per kilogram of cement, we can get incredible increases in compressive strength, tensile strength, up to 35%. So imagine that we can make, just by adding 1 gram per kilogram of cement, we can make the same building using 35% less cement, or less concrete. So we published this in Nature in 2020, which is a pretty good journal. But we kept working to say what carbon feedstocks can we use? And so, given all of the plastic waste that's around us, it's a pretty free feedstock of carbon. It's about 80 to 90% of what our plastic is carbon. And so we know that the carbon converts into our high-value graphene. But one question I had was what happens to the hydrogen and the oxygen locked in the waste plastic? And so one thing that I was thinking was, what if we could harness the hydrogen in our waste plastic to make clean hydrogen? And so hydrogen is being thought of as a clean fuel source because it doesn't result in any CO2 when it's burned. And so we already use about 100 million tons of hydrogen globally every year. That's even without fuel cell cars. And the dirty secret that no one tells you is that hydrogen, which is a clean fuel source, is usually made from fossil fuels and usually makes a lot of CO2 while you're making the hydrogen. So we kind of need to make economically competitive, low CO2 methods of hydrogen production and graphene production. So that's what I did in my PhD. We can start with our mixed waste plastic. We don't have to separate it. We don't have to wash it, which are big problems with recycling plastics. We do our heating process. We get high purity hydrogen and high value graphene. And so here's a graph showing that whatever plastic we're using, we can get a lot of hydrogen out of it, as well as in really high purities and qualities of graphene. But what really made the deal for me was when we looked at how efficient our process is compared to current graphene production methods and current hydrogen production methods. We can do what's known as a life cycle assessment to measure how sustainable our process is. And so you can see at the bottom bar, we're making a lot less CO2 compared to other graphene production methods and other hydrogen production methods. But the real kicker is that if we're making this clean hydrogen and graphene at the same time, these two valuable products, if we sell the graphene even at 5% of its current market value, so a 95% off sale on graphene, I think Ford would like that, it pays for the hydrogen. It pays, you're producing clean hydrogen at negative cost. So what a great story to convert waste polymer into high-value graphene and free clean hydrogen. So a startup company known as Universal Matter is hoping to scale this process to tons per day. So being able to make tons of graphene per day from coal products. The DOE cares a lot about hydrogen, and we can kind of achieve their goal of making 1 kilogram of clean hydrogen for $1. They said we want to do this in 1 decade. But with this work, if we sell our graphene, then we can do that today. So yeah, that's kind of my spiel on how we can use flash joule heating to convert waste feedstocks into valuable graphene as well as clean hydrogen.